the basis of what yielding does for us as we move through life, making our life more like a hero's journey, is it allows us to start loosening our attachment to the story. Because while living life more like a hero's journey does involve crafting a story, if you're only going to get attached to that story instead of the one you had, the results won't be so different. There needs to be a story. We tell stories, we communicate that way. It's what we do as people. I mean, if you look at any great story, any great hero's journey story, it starts with the hero going, who am I? It starts with that same moment we were just talking about in mindfulness. Who am I? Who is Luke Skywalker? You know, who is the Karate Kid? You know, their whole journey becomes about that. And we are interested because we want that same thing for ourselves. And it's some of the deepest communication we can have with others, sharing that journey of finding ourselves. And being with other people who are also going through that is incredibly transformative, because you create a space where things can catalyze in a way that they don't without that kind of support. Because these things aren't easy. You're really coming up against, you know, so much stuff we can't even see, you know, our stuff that's in our shadow, that's our instincts almost as humans, that our minds really spend a lot of time working against. But when we can start to get in touch with that, with actually who we are, like the way, Carrie, you have a dog, right? Did you just have a dog in your lap? Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. I go to my dog all the time for understanding the connection to the present moment. I talked about this in a video on TikTok and Instagram last week. We went out for a walk in the snow, and he is always, and cats are like this too. All animals really are like this. They don't have that thinking mind. They don't have that. Even the ones that have been abused, they'll be scared and they'll remember, but they won't hold on to that story. They'll change that story in the face of new evidence. They're right there in the moment. They're operating with their instincts. They're embracing everything about who they are without thinking about anything. And while our thinking minds are super useful, they're not always useful in every situation. For example, they're not useful at times where we're treating life as a problem to be solved. If we're looking at life as a problem to be solved, all we have to operate with is our problem-solving mind. And that's full of doubt. That's full of all kinds of just stinking thinking, you know. I don't remember where that's from, but I heard it's from a movie, I think in the 80s. Or there's just, we're gonna wind up, if we're relying on just our minds for the answers to the question, who am I? We're never gonna get there, because who we are is not our story. It's not our mind. It's something deeper than that. It's the inner peace we find when we transcend our story. And that's really what the hero's journey is. The hero's journey is a journey through the world to our own inner world. So through the outside world, we come to know ourselves and who we are. And that isn't defined by the journey, the story, anything about that. That knowledge is inner peace. That knowledge is something we can share as who we are, not what we know or what we are. And that to me was the real gift, that when my aunt told me when I was 22 to go out and live life like a hero's journey, something about that just resonated with me, even though I denied it at first. And it literally took me almost 40 years of living that way to finally see where it was all going. And I think that's where Awaken Your Myth came out of, is that it all finally came together. And I was like, oh, I see. This out here in the world is a way to this in here, which is a truth and a peace and a sense of knowing that's non-conceptual of who we are, that we're all searching for. And there's not a lot of support for it in a lot of places in the world. I mean, there are great spiritual teachers. For example, I remember the first time I read Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. Have any of you read that? Or A New Earth is also a great book by him. He talks about a lot of these things, a lot about inner peace and mindfulness and how to get there. But I always felt like this feels like unattainable to me. This sort of peace feels unattainable. How do I do it? And then what I've realized is we can do it through the way we live our lives. And that involves just making slow, deliberate steps towards more mindfulness. And then from that base of mindfulness, looking for the places in life where we can begin to yield. Yielding is really kind of like mindfulness. It's the thing that we can do to bring us a step closer to who we are. So when we yield, we're really making a decision to say, I'm not going to resist this. I'm just going to allow it. I don't have to accept it necessarily. I kind of do have to accept it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to want it to stay this way, but I accept it. This is how it is. And I'm not going to deny that part, because I know this was true for me for so long, God, especially before I came out, in my teens and my early 20s. I was just coming up against my own identity so hard. And there was so much denial. When I accepted that, it was an incredible relief. And if I couldn't have done that kind of acceptance back in the late 80s, I wouldn't have ever been able to take the steps after that. My life would have taken a completely different course. And we all have these kind of moments in life. They may not be so big as, like coming out of the closet. But there are moments where we approach them as we are resisting, or we're clinging to an old identity that's no longer us, because we're like, but this is who I am. This is who I've always been. I don't know what it would be like to not be this. That kind of fear can be so compelling and so throwing us into our thoughts and all those spirals where we really need that mindfulness to come back to our center. Then yielding allows us to take the first step towards letting go. Because what comes after yielding is what's even more powerful. And that's surrender. That's really being in a place where you're letting go, not holding on to the story, not holding on to the identity, not holding on to any of it. It's all up for grabs. Is that necessary? No. But when it's available, it's incredible, because it's also not something, surrender isn't something we can really do. Yielding is something we can do. Surrender is something that we have an intention for, that when the moment comes, it's alchemical. It's like the outside world and our inside world, our intuition and the synchronicity of the world around us come together in a moment of perfect knowing where all we have to do is get out of the way. And you see it again in every hero's journey story, right? It's the force, right? When in that moment, when things have really hit the fan, when there just looks like there's no way out, that's when, given the preparation of mindfulness and learning how to yield, we have an opportunity for surrender. And some of the most transformational moments in my life have come from surrender, giving up, completely giving up. We all know what it's like to prefer one thing over another. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when our preferences become our identity, or when our preferences become more than preferences and become necessities for our happiness, then now we have just turned over our happiness, our peace, to our preferences. And where did our preferences come from? You could say, oh, they're a part of who I am, but are they really? When we can learn to yield, we start to see that my preferences are just preferences. Sure, there are hard no's in life. We have things that we have to say, no, I will not do this. But simply acknowledging that we have maybe even the capacity to do this. This is another part of the hero's journey, really, that the hero's journey isn't a journey to becoming a hero. It's to the realization that we all have within us heroes, villains, tricksters, sages. All of these are a part of us. And the journey to discovering those things in ourselves is where the hero part comes in. Because, and that's what's so great about this myth that's been around longer than history. It's the first story people ever started telling each other about who we are at our core and how to get there. And we still tell it today. You can go out and see, most movies that are going to come out, as long as they're making movies, have an element of the hero's journey or are about the hero's journey, because it calls to us. It calls to us because it tells us something about our own nature. And these elements, the pillars of the myths method, are kind of what I distilled out of that story and my own implementation of it. Many years of doing it painfully, resisting, and not finding the peace part. And I don't think it has to be that way. It doesn't have to take everyone 40 years, for sure. It just had to take me 40 years. I think, you can get there as soon as you get there. But the perspective of approaching it as a journey, where that's where it's heading, and it happens here in the real world, and it happens with what happens to us every day. It isn't about something special needing to happen. It's about taking what is happening and moving from there and building a story from there.